Perfect.
So before I start this episode, I just wanted to say, last week I said that I wasn't into Universal's monsters and like old school horror. Okay, I don't watch it for fun. It doesn't mean that I don't like it. I just don't go out of my way to watch movies from the 40s. And again, no hate to the movies in the 40s. I'm just more interested in modern day stuff. I appreciate the aesthetics of everything. I'm never hating on any aspect of horror, ever. I understand how important it is to understand the reason that those old school monsters were there. I get that. It's just boring as hell. Okay, so now that I'm done covering my tracks, this episode is going to be kind of like an extension of last week's episode, where I kind of explained to the horror newbies like how to find the right movies, how to kind of find like the right subgenres for them, and like what apps to use really. So this episode, I'm kind of getting more in like to the directors. A big question I asked last week was, where do you even begin? Like in the years, where do you even begin starting watching horror movies? Like, how do you even get into it? Obviously, there's a lot of things you need to know about, like director wise and movie wise, to even get references nowadays. So I'm going to lay out to you guys directors, and not just new age directors. I'm kind of leaning more towards directors that are actually going to be like influential later on. You guys have probably already heard of Wes Craven, John Carpenter, Tobe Hooper. You know, the list goes on of people who are like iconic in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and still are iconic to this day, and still having hands in their horror movie franchises like to this day. That's fucking awesome. But there has been a lot of like big directors come out like over the past 10 years who have really done something for the horror genre itself, and that needs to be talked about because yes, movies from the 70s and the 80s really created the genre into what it is today, but it's going to continue. It's just going to continue to get better, continue to change. And there's a couple of people that you need to know about now in order to be like up to date in the future. So, for one, the one you've probably heard of already, Jordan Peele. I've loved Jordan Peele since way back in the day. He's been a comedian for a really long time, and I always thought he was so funny. So seeing him like kind of get into the horror genre is really interesting, because when I first heard of Get Out, I was like, the fuck kind of bullshit is this going to be? And it ends up being one of the most like iconic horror movies of this decade. Insane. But what's interesting about Jordan Peele is he has created basically his own like horror genre. We've seen social horror kind of be touched on previously. The Society is a really good example of this, but still leans more on the body horror side. But again, as far as social horror goes, Jordan Peele has like virtually created his own subgenre. Get Out and Us are like two of my favorite horror movies to come out in the past decade. And his style and his incorporation of like new age music and things like that are untouched by anyone else in the genre right now. And he is one of those directors you can see that people, when I say people, I mean other directors, watch his films and they're like, okay, we're going to try this. Like, we're going to add some new age music in here, and we're going to make this. Can I say Spiral? I'm going to talk shit about this movie. Okay, so what Chris Rock did and Drake did, or whatever the fuck, recording Spiral, is, to me, you can tell a lot of the influences from Jordan Peele in that movie, especially with the new age music. So Chris Rock and Drake and whoever had their hands on that god awful movie try to do the same thing as Jordan Peele with like adding new age music and yada yada yada, and it just doesn't fit. So my whole purpose of saying Jordan Peele is because clearly he's created his own style and own things to be copied within the genre. So that to me is a telltale sign that this guy is going to blow the fuck up, which clearly he already has. Another big name that you need to know about in modern day horror is James Wan. You probably know James Wan's name from the Saw series, maybe even Fast and Furious, and the Conjuring series. Now, James Wan back in the day used to be my motherfucking dude. Nowadays, oh, like I don't want to talk shit because I know he's making his money, but honestly, like his films are really falling short for me. nowadays. But either way, James Wan, he's created a lot of the big franchises nowadays. Like I said, The Conjuring is super important in nowadays horror movies that you know about that, and the director that created that. And James Wan is that guy. So watch his movies, I guess, but he's not like, it's hard for me to like hype up people I'm not that into. So next director you must know about is Robert Eggers. The Witch and The Lighthouse are two of my like favorite horror movies ever. What makes Robert Eggers really, really stand out to me as a new age, like prophetic director is that his style is so aesthetically pleasing. And like when you see his films, you know that's him. Like I said, he only has 2 like feature films right now, but he has another movie coming out called Nosferatu. He's going to remake that. I absolutely love him. His style is more like, I wouldn't say Lovecraftian because it's not necessarily that. It's like that vintage, old school horror style with a really good slow burn story. That's like his thing. And speaking of directors with things, this is very comparable to like M. Night Shyamalan. When you watch his films, you know with that signature twist that this is an M. Night Shyamalan film, and you love it or you hate it. Either way, like you're either super into his films or you're super not. Robert Eggers is one of those people. You either really love the films that he's come out with or you really haven't. The similarities between The Witch and The Lighthouse are really close. So if you liked one or the other, you're probably going to like Robert Eggers and the rest of the movies he's going to put out. Like, that just is what it is. But speaking of M. Night Shyamalan, he's also another that you need to know about. Split, The Visit, Old, The Sixth Sense. It like the list with this man literally goes on and on. Yes, I understand he's been out for like, what, since the 90s? The 90s? But like, this is a staple right now. Like, right now. Everybody talks about Wes Craven. Everybody talks about John Carpenter. Like, yes, these people are extremely important. But as we move along, growing into horror, and as horror grows into what we watch nowadays, M. Night is a very important part of that. And then finally, Eli Roth. Okay, I used to be a huge Eli Roth fan. I mean, like the biggest. Hostel and Cabin Fever were amazing. I'm a huge disturbing movie fan, so I used to follow Eli Roth really heavy because he's super influenced by things like Cannibal Holocaust and, you know, those gritty, gory underground movies, and you can really see that come through in his work. But recently, Eli Roth has been disappointing the fuck out of me. After I watched Green Inferno, I was like, never again. Like I said, this man is like super influenced by Cannibal Holocaust. So when I went into Green Inferno, I was like, all right, I'm about to see some seriously like twisted shit. We're going to go back. Like, this is the movie that influenced him. Like, so I guess I just expected something and just for the shittiest fallout ever. And also Knock Knock, like how the fuck do you have Keanu Reeves in your movie and it sucks? How? And it's probably because he's doing like the Rob Zombie thing where he puts his wife in like every single movie that he comes out with. But honestly, it's just not working for him. It's not working for her. Baby, you are no Sherry Moon Zombie. And you need to stop. But yeah, oh my God, I'm over here like literally talking shit about this man. I'm so sorry. The whole reason I brought him in this conversation is because he is an important piece of like modern day horror history, even though, yeah, his style is, I wouldn't say camp. It's very like old school, loose comedy horror. Is that the best way to describe him? Yeah, like I said, Knock Knock, Cabin Fever, Green Inferno. He's also in Inglourious Bastards. So like if you're into Eli Roth as like a human being, he also does acting, whatever. But if you're into Eli Roth as a director, watch what you can. But moral of the story, even though I have talked shit about like half these new age directors, is that it's very important to educate yourself, not only on the classics and the people who like created the foundation of horror. Although it is like, I mean, obviously to understand what we're talking about now, you're going to have to educate yourself on that. But horror is moving and changing so quickly, especially now that it's been kind of like influenced by pop culture and really dripped itself into pop culture. But it's important to know about these new directors and kind of keep up with them, because that's what's going to be influencing things for the future. Like when we're old as shit, we're not going to get to have our Friday the 13th and our Nightmare on Elm Streets. Like our Get Out is our Nightmare on Elm Street. Does that make sense? It makes sense. Wow, I just realized I was not very descriptive at all when I was describing these directors, but the whole point was like, I don't have to describe that to you. Between last episode and this one, like you've got to figure out what you're into first. All I'm doing is kind of setting out this outline for you guys to follow and kind of figure out what you're into. So when we do that, we'll be able to get deeper in conversation about directors and the meanings behind the movies they're making and who they were influenced by. But yeah, hopefully this episode was a little bit interesting for you guys, just kind of laying out the names of people you need to follow, people who are influenced by other people. And, you know, if we get further in this little thing we're doing here, I will definitely get further into conversation about directors and movies and the whole list of what they've done. But until then, I'm just kind of trying to set an outline for you guys. So that being said, follow me on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and follow Project Nerd on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. I think that's all of it. So yeah, I will see you guys next week.